Good afternoon, everyone. A number of years ago, somewhere in the Midwest, a car was speeding along a somewhat deserted highway, going at a pretty high speed, and it came to a corner, and the driver lost control of the car, and it went over the embankment and went end over end down into the ravine below. There were 3 or 4 people in the car, and they were all severely injured with life-threatening injuries, except for one who managed to get out of the wreckage and crawled up the embankment slowly, painfully, until he reached the road and tried to summon help by standing by the road waiting for another car to come by. And soon a car appeared, and he started waving frantically, trying to get the car's attention. The car slowed momentarily, went around the corner, and continued on down the road. This was to be repeated over a period of 2 hours before someone finally stopped to see what was happening. Now, understandably, we're warned about things like this, especially late at night where you've read stories where they've feigned being injured, feigned an accident so they could stop someone and rob them. So being late at night in a somewhat deserted area, you can understand why people might have that view. But that's kind of the way we are. You know, we're suspicious. We're told, don't pick up hitchhikers. Don't talk to strangers. In Frederickson, which is only about a 20-minute drive from where we live, a young deputy was shot to death, 34 years old, and you've probably seen it on the news, with 3 small children on Monday in the middle of trying to apprehend a person that had committed a home invasion. And just this morning, as I was walking from one room to the other, one of the TVs was on, the news was on, and I saw where they were asking for the public's help for another home invasion attempt where 5 or 6 people in a fairly late model car drove up and knocked the door in right in the middle of the day, and they were looking for them. So we live in that kind of environment. That goes on around us, and because of that, a lot of times we're very suspicious, and sometimes that suspicion follows us into the church. We're suspicious of people's intentions. We're suspicious. We don't want to get too close to anyone because, you know, when you get close to someone, you might get hurt. And we've all been hurt at times. We've all thought that someone was our friend, and yet things happen that turn that completely around. Well, we need to have close friends. In spite of what's going on around us, we need to have close friends, especially here in the church. You know, when I think back over the years I've been in the church, all of my closest friends have been church members. I can count on one hand one of my best friends through grade school and high school, I would still say is close, and another one in college. But that's 2 out of a lifetime. Whereas I can give you the names of many people in the church that are my friends. You probably wouldn't recognize his name because he was up in the Everett congregation, but his name was Bill Zimmerman. And he used to be a taxidermist. And he had one closet that was filled with antlers, with stuffed heads of birds, deer, and whatnot, and it was so full that no one could get in it. And he was the target for that closet, because of the closet, from the pulpit by a number of people. But we could kid him and we could tease him about that because he was close. We were that close in the congregation. Well, let's examine an example to use as a pattern for us to use, an ideal to strive for in friendship. To set the stage, I'm going to talk about Jonathan and David. You know, David killed Goliath and became quite famous as a result. And then he went on to kill his 10,000s, while Saul only killed his thousands. And so Saul became very upset about that, the glory that David was receiving. And he thought, you know, that upstart's going to take my throne. Anyway, he threw a spear at David twice. And so David thought, well, I better get out of here. It doesn't look too good, as well he might have been when, you know, someone throws a spear at you or maybe points a gun in your direction. You know it's time to leave. Anyway, picking up the story in 1 Samuel 20 and verse 33. 1 Samuel 20 and verse 33. And Saul cast a javelin at him. Now this is where Saul, he'd cast it twice at David. Now he throws it at his own son. So his son knows that if he's that mad about David to the point where he wants to spare his own son, that David knew he was determined to, Jonathan knew that he was determined to slay David, which is what that verse says. And going on to verse 41, they had arranged to have a signal that Jonathan would let David know whether or not it was safe to come back. In verse 41, it says, as soon as the lad was gone, David rose out of his hiding place, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept one another until David exceeded. So he was warned. Jonathan warned him. You know, he knew what was going on at home, and he said, you've got to leave. Well, we need to have close friends in the church. The question is, do we? Do we have close friends in the church? Turn to 2 Samuel 1, verse 26. This is just another verse that once again shows the relationship between David and Jonathan. This was when David received news that Jonathan had been killed. And he said, I'm in distress for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. So that's a pretty strong statement, because when you think about the intimate relationships between husband and wife and how close that is, this was a similar relationship, except it wasn't a physical relationship like that. It was an emotional, it was a mental. It was these minds thought so much alike. You know, in John 15, verse 15, you don't have to turn there, Jesus said, I've called you friends. He's called us friends. And the Greek for friends is philos, which means someone that's dear to you, someone that you're fond of. Well, brethren, who can you talk to about the Feast of Tabernacles? The loss of a loved one who has died, maybe in your family, and who you hope to see again. You know you'll see them again. Or try this one on for size. How many of you walk into the water cooler at work or to the coffee shop or wherever they meet for coffee and say to someone, well, what do you think about eternal life and living forever? they'll start looking at their watch and say, oh, I think I've got a meeting I have to go to, and I've got this report I've got to finish. Sayonara, adios, see you around. And they'll walk the other direction the next time they see you. For us to talk about things like that, it doesn't take any effort. We understand, we understand those things. Well, these are, heavy things, but we can talk freely and we don't put up any barriers. How about this quick test? Are your closest friends in the church? Do you see any brethren during the month or during the week? Are you excited about church activities so you have a chance to fellowship? When was the last time you had a member or in your house or visited theirs? Now, I'm not beating anyone up here. There's no right or wrong answers to this, but these are provocative questions to make you think about, just how close am I? Do I have these kind of friends? The society we live in is not going to get any better in the future. We're all going to need the friendship of others to help us survive for the tough times ahead. Ask God to grant you the same type of friendship that David and Jonathan had for each other, and as Christ has for his church. There are all kinds of opportunities. There's a lot of them coming up, the church activities, to develop close, lasting, eternal friendships. Take advantage of today, next week, tomorrow, next month, next Sabbath to develop these friendships, because to quote an old Charlie Brown saying, we need all the friends we can get.